What is up, 2022 enjoyers? It is your boy Jay Bongo. So, I'm going to get started very soon, very, very soon, on recording an episode with Solasta, founder of the Magister. Now, before I get into that video game, I want to talk with y'all about what mechanics are in play with Solasta, because it is based off of a game called D&D, and it is based off of the 5th edition of that game. And if you know nothing about Dungeons and Dragons, that is fine. If you know nothing about 5th edition, that is fine. But I figured I'd take the opportunity to do this video to sort of boil down what exactly 5th edition and Dungeons and Dragons are, for those that are interested in sort of being a little bit more knowledgeable before going into the Let's Play. Because certain mechanics that the game uses will make sense later on. Like, I have not played Solasta, but I'm pretty sure there is a turn-based mode, like with most of the CRPGs coming out around tabletop RPGs like Pathfinder, and like this one that uses 5th edition mechanics. So, now, I'll explain all that in a bit. So Dungeons & Dragons, for those that do not know, is a tabletop role-playing game invented somewhere in the vein of the 70s/80s. It was made by Gary Gygax and his friends, who got off of wargaming, which is a different type of tabletop game. Basically, wargaming is like war simulations, like simulating a battlefield. Think Warhammer now, sort of, with how it works out. The Warhammer tabletop system. But Gary Gygax wanted to add a bit more fantasy elements to it, maybe more fantastical adventures. So he created Chainmail, which was sort of like beta Dungeons and Dragons First Edition. So after workshopping with Chainmail for a while, he came up with Dungeons and Dragons with his friends. And ever since, it has been slowly rising in fame amongst fellow nerds and geeks alike for being this amazing tabletop experience. Now, to play Dungeons & Dragons, all you need is a set of dice. You need more than D6s, though. What is this, Shadowrun? And you just need pen, paper, and some friends. Now, some would consider that an oxymoron. I mean, what kind of nerd has friends? I'm just kidding. This isn't the early 2000s and 90s anymore. So, you need to get a whole bunch of like-minded friends and individuals involved in the game. The hardest part of the game is setting up a date to play said game. And then part of that, as soon as you get that hard part out of the way, it all flows naturally. The game is a very interesting learning curve depending on which edition of Dungeons & Dragons you're playing. The first and second editions are considered the hardest because those were a lot of their raw RPG mechanics came into play. For instance, in first and second edition, I think armor class was backwards. So the lower your armor class, which is how much an enemy needs to roll past in order to hit you. So, for example, with we're going with 5th edition right now. So in 5th edition and any other edition before that, like 3rd and 4th, in these editions, if an enemy rolls higher than your armor class, and some tables, if they roll at your armor class, it hits, and they're able to roll damage. Let's say, for instance, I have a great sword. The great sword damage is 2d6. So I hit your armor class. I roll a 20-sided die, and I roll. Let's say your armor class is 15. I roll a 17 plus my strength and everything. All those numbers will come into play later. I'll explain more about the numbers when we actually get into Solasta. But let's say I beat your armor class. So I'm rolling 2d6 for damage. So I rolled 2d6 for damage. I rolled a 9 for these 2d6. I know I just displayed different numbers, but that's what I rolled. Oh. I swear it was a 5 and a 4. I put this up and there was the 6 showing. Anyways. So I roll a 9. We're not even going to talk about modifiers yet. So I dealt 9 points of damage, and you would subtract 9 from your hit die pool, or your health. So that's combat in a nutshell, and that's where the kind of turn-based mode comes into play. I have encountered this before in Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, which I do still want to get to on this channel, because I've never actually beaten it. I don't even think I've gotten close to beating it. I just kept making characters. But Solasta is one of those that I want to sort of play through on the Dirt Laser channel. So, aside from that, so Solasta, the way they determine their turn-based stuff is based in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. Now, why specifically 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons? Well, firstly, it is the most recent edition to come out in years. Before that, you have 4th edition, which we don't talk about, and then we have 3rd edition, which was probably, while it was a very solid edition of Dungeons and Dragons, it was also the most convoluted, because there's so many different rules coming at you at different angles, and that's the thing that turns a lot of players off when it comes to tabletop role-playing games, is the abundance of a lot of rules and a lot of optional rules. But you'll find when you're playing D&D that a lot of the times your group will agree on a set of rules that make sense for them. This is called homebrew. Now, homebrewed rules, you basically take a rule set from the game, or like two things. You take a rule set from a game and you workshop it a little bit to sort of tweak it a little, or you completely get rid of a rule set in favor of another rule set. Like, for example, for 5th edition, one of my things with Dark Vision that I don't like is that characters who are subterranean creatures have dark vision out of 60 feet, right? So, realistically, they should be able to see in the dark just fine. But in D&D 5th edition, you can only see dim light as if it were normal light, and in complete darkness as if it were dim light. So that it still imposes some penalties, which doesn't make much sense to me if your character is born, like you're a dwarf, you're born underground, you're a subterranean humanoid. So you're used to these environments. So you should technically be able to see in the darkness just fine, with a few caveats. So one of my rules for that is that you can see in the dark just fine out to 60 feet, but you can't discern color, and you can only discern certain details. It's basically like thermal vision. Like if you look through a thermal scope, you can see gray, and any sort of life displays of this like white hot, has these like white hot. Or you could also think of it as predator vision. I meant white hot outlines, my bad. I didn't finish that thought. So, but you could also do like infrared visions, where it's just like everything else is a shade of blue, but any heat signatures will be red. You know, that makes more sense to me, and it makes dwarves and other creatures with dark vision a bit more useful. Now, Solasta, as far as I know, doesn't have any home rules. So it's a video game. It has to subscribe by its own set of rules, and it's not a near perfect copy of 5th edition. It's just 5th edition mechanics in a video game, if that makes any sense. It'll make more sense because I'll try to explain as I'm going through Solasta, just to make things make more sense in a way, as best as I can anyway. I know I tend to be a bit rambly, but I think I've done an okay job at staying on topic. So this is based in 5th edition. It is the most recent edition. And the reason why it's not based in 3rd edition, and why a lot of games are not based in 3rd edition as much anymore, is because 3rd edition can be kind of daunting for new players. So, trying to get somebody into D&D with 3rd edition, you have to really know that system in order to teach it very well. Because that's half of the battle with getting people to play D&D, is teaching people how to play D&D. And many groups take different approaches with that. Sometimes a DM will just straight up drop you into a session at your first session, whether it's just you and the DM, or the DM or Dungeon Master and just their group. So that's basically it. In this, I hope to bring other people into D&D. There are 70 of you now, I would like to show you, just invite you into my world, just a little bit of Dungeons and Dragons. And there are several other channels that explain things so much better than I can. And if you want recommendations for channels, you let me know in the comments, and I'll give you a few recommendations. Okay? So that's my little 10-minute spiel before we actually get into Solasta content. Just as a reminder, it will be on Dirt Laser, our gaming channel, because I want to kind of keep this channel for other stuff. There might be some games on here, but it'll just be like one-offs. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found it informative and interesting. And if you have any more questions about Dungeons & Dragons, let me know. I have been Jay Bongo. You have all been awesome, and I will see you on Dirt Laser and the next time on this channel. Bye-bye.